When Joseph Ligon walked out of Cy Phoenix, a maximum security prison outside Philadelphia, on February 11, 2021, the 83-year-old carried little more than a box of belongings and a thin folder of legal papers. Yet his step into the winter air marked the end of one of the longest incarcerations in modern United States history, and a landmark journey through America's evolving understanding of juvenile justice. Ligon had entered the system in 1953 as a 15-year-old eighth grader. He left 68 years later as a living symbol of punishment, resilience, and long-delayed redemption. Joseph Ligon grew up in a tight-knit but impoverished black neighborhood. School bored him. He struggled with undiagnosed learning disabilities and often skipped classes. On the night of November 18, 1953, Joseph met up with a group of older teens. The boys drank cheap wine, roamed South Street, and, according to police, committed a series of robberies and stabbings that left 2 men, Charles Pitt and Jackson Ham, dead and 6 others wounded. Ligon later admitted wielding a knife but insisted he never struck a fatal blow. Forensic evidence was minimal by modern standards. Still, Philadelphia detectives eager for a swift resolution obtained written confessions from several boys. Facing the adults' criminal court, Pennsylvania had no separate juvenile homicide jurisdiction at the time. All pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder to avoid the electric chair. The mandatory sentence: life without parole. At age 15, Joseph Ligon was told he would die behind walls. Ligon entered Pennsylvania's notorious Graterford prison, then a grim stone fortress, where teenagers mixed with hardened killers. Illiterate and terrified, he quickly learned the code of survival. Keep your head down, find a job, avoid gang politics. Over time he worked in the prison laundry, the license plate shop, and the kitchen. He taught himself to read, earned vocational certificates, and embraced a strict personal discipline that would define him for decades. But the world outside kept changing. Civil rights marches, Vietnam, Watergate. Ligon experienced it all through newspapers and a tiny cell radio. By the 1980s he had already outlived most family members and watched dozens of fellow lifers carried out on stretchers. For decades the United States was virtually alone in sentencing children to die in prison. That began to shift in the early 2000s, culminating in 3 landmark Supreme Court decisions. Roper v. Simmons, 2005, abolished the juvenile death penalty, citing developmental science on adolescent brains. Graham v. Florida, 2010, prohibited life without parole for juveniles in non-homicide cases. Miller v. Alabama, 2012, ruled mandatory LWOP for juveniles unconstitutional, requiring individualized sentencing. Ligon's conviction, once unassailable, now seemed ripe for challenge. With help from the Philadelphia-based Juvenile Law Center, he filed petitions arguing that Pennsylvania's mandatory statute violated Miller. In 2016, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ordered that all juvenile lifers, including Ligon, receive new minimum-maximum sentences or become immediately parole eligible. Joseph's hearing offered the first real chance at freedom since Eisenhower was president. The prosecution sought 35 years to life, a term that would have made him instantly parole eligible but left the parole board in control. Ligon shocked observers by rejecting any sentence that included parole. To him, parole was continued punishment, mandatory curfews, lifetime supervision, and the power to yank liberty at a moment's notice. "I'm not leaving on paper," he told his lawyers. Either the court vacated his life term outright or he would stay imprisoned. Many thought he was throwing away his only shot. But a 2020 federal ruling sided with Ligon, because his original sentence was unconstitutional and the state had exhausted time limits to resentence him. He must be released forthwith. After 68 years, Joseph Ligon finally accepted freedom, on his terms, with no parole strings attached. Adjusting to 21st century life is daunting for any ex-prisoner, let alone one who last walked free when a loaf of bread cost 16 cents. Supporters set up a GoFundMe. Strangers donated clothes, a laptop, even noise-canceling headphones to soften the shock of city traffic. With help from Philadelphia's Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project, Ligon learned to use a smartphone, ride digital buses, and navigate supermarkets stocked with foods he had only read about. He moved into a small studio apartment and joined weekly community dinners where other former juvenile lifers trade advice on healthcare, technology, and dating in old age.